Welcome to this Chairman's Dialogue series of the Asian Society. I'm delighted that our first session should be on India's role in the world, both geopolitically and geo-economically. Dr. Goswami, PhD from Oxford, highly successful and very interesting economist that I've known for perhaps 30 years. We're delighted to welcome you to our program. And in this public section, before I begin, I want to again thank Sino Group and ANZ Bank for supporting us. This session will begin with Dr. Goswami giving us a 20 minutes or so presentation, and then we'll open it to discussion, and it is recorded. So if you have any question, then please type into the Slido, and then we will pick out the questions and then ask Dr. Goswami your question. Okay, so Omkar, welcome. We look forward to your presentation. You're muted, Omkar. Good. You're muted, Omkar.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We go a long way, Ronnie and I. So what I'm going to do is quickly, just hold it. Just hold that presentation. Just hold it at that point. I'm going to quickly take you through some basic stuff. The first issue is quite interesting. So this is, forget about India, this is India, Bangladesh, and China. What's happened? Is it?
You want to slide back? Jenny, put it back on, please. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So let's just look at the red, which is China, and the green, that is India. Now, the interesting thing is up to 1978 or thereabouts, you know, India was per capita GDP in constant prices was higher than China. And then China just took off. And you can see China taking off. And then if you were to look from the beginning of India's reform in 1991 till today, China has taken off. And today we are looking at China's per capita GDP at 5.8 times per capita than that of India. India has done well, but the difference between the two is quite staggering. Can I have the next slide, please? But however, equally, both economies are slowing down in recent times. The red is China's GDP growth per quarter, and it took a hit during COVID in January, March 2020. India took a much bigger hit in April, June 2020 because of a shutdown of 90 days that took place. And so this big spike that happened was exactly 1 year later. So it was compared to this hit, China got the spike, and compared to this hit in 2020, April, June, India got the spike. But generally, both countries have slowed down. I mean, we are looking in both cases of 5% or sub 5% growth over the last several quarters. Okay. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, the possibilities of growth, no, just hold that slide. The possibilities of growth come from savings. And here again, while China's spectacular savings rate of over 50%, as you had up to 2007-08 has come down, but even then, and this is World Bank data, 44% of GDP is savings in China, whereas it's 30.7% in India. And this is a big difference in savings. And remember that the GDP, the denominator in China, is way more than that of India. So if you have almost a 14% point difference in savings rate over a much larger denominator, you have far more potential investable resources than India. Can I have the next slide, please? So that actually shows up. GFCF is gross fixed capital formation. Again, the data is from the World Bank. And that shows up, again, I mean, India was not bad. I mean, India had taken it up to about 35% by 2007. But the fact is that China today has something like over 40% of GDP goes into gross fixed capital formation, whereas in India, it's about 28, 29, sometimes 30% of GDP. Again, a huge difference in the fixed capital formation. You have to again look at it in terms of the denominator. The denominator in China is much larger. Therefore, the total amount of gross fixed capital formation in China is not only high in percentage terms, but is also high in absolute terms. May I have the next slide, please? Yeah, now both these countries have increased their debt. Today, I mean, if you were to look at, say, 2008, 2009, and there are question marks about some of China's numbers, but forget about those question marks for the time being. But today, China's gross debt, and this is from the IMF, is about 70% of GDP. India's has gone up substantially at 90%. Now, neither of this is, well, India's is a little bit worrisome, but it's not cataclysmic. One has to slowly pull the debt down. It will take time because once you have increased borrowings, debt goes up and it takes time to pull it down. But it's not cataclysmic. But given a lower savings rate, you have to end up actually borrowing much more, which is why the gross debt of the general government in India is higher than that of China. The next slide, please. This is well known to all of you. This is the current account balance as a percentage of GDP. Actually, it becomes earlier, it used to be a big thing that China has this incredible current account balance. It's always positive. It was as high as, 10%, 8%, 9%, 8%. And now it's come down to, sub 2%. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't really matter too much whether you have a huge current account surplus or you have a reasonable current account deficit. I'm not talking of a current account deficit of, say, something like what we had in 2012, which was more than 4%. But the kind of current account deficit that we have now, though I have to say there is a huge risk in terms of energy prices because we import all our crude oil, almost all of it. So, but it's okay. The positive is obviously China has a current account balance which is positive and India has a negative current account balance, but I wouldn't worry too much about that from India's point of view. The next slide, please. Now, this is something where I would welcome questions. So I'm going to give you India's population and China's population, both from the UN population surveys. So if you were to look at 2020, in India, 385 million people were at the age of 30 to 49. So the question to ask is, where are the jobs for this vast army? And as we go forward, and as a lesser number of people are needed to create the same amount of income or value added, how does one create a situation where this 385 million men and women, most of them will get jobs? The other is this 240 million, which is of the age group of 20 to 29. So again, the question is, where are the jobs and what is the education for this lot? Because increasingly, jobs will be education driven, not necessarily very fancy education, but certainly education. And then we have the 10 to 19, we have 252 million people. And what is the quality of education for so many? Okay. What is the quality of the education that we impart for so many people? And if you would look at China, China also has its problems. The next slide, please. Yeah. So China's problems are on the top three. there are some 146 million people who are of the ages of 65 to 79. Who will take care of the non-working aged going forward? Then there are 300 million people in the ages of 50 to 64. And again, the question is, there's a vast army of people, 300 million, which will go to even becoming even older. And what is the social security measure? As of now, families have taken care of it. But what is the social security measure for China? And the last one is there 445 million people, 31% of the population, in the age group of 30 to 49. And how do you ensure enough jobs for this large number of people, not just in main city centers, but across the country? Next slide, please. And I think if it is not the last slide, it will be the last slide as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, it is the last slide. Now, as far as India is concerned, we have some geopolitical China challenges. As of now, and I haven't marked it out here, as of now, we have a Chinese port in Djibouti, which is here. China has the right to create a port at Gwadar, which is just next, which is in Pakistan, and it is going to create a port because it's a very important area where the Persian Gulf comes out into the Arabian Sea. China has the right to build a port, including a naval port in Hambantota in Sri Lanka, and it will try and build that port because, again, it creates a great position for the southern part of the Indian Ocean. Then you have Myanmar, which is close to China. And, of course, the oil pipelines go all the way up Myanmar, and then they turn right into Kunming and into China. And as far as we are concerned, we have three other problems. One is territorial challenges, one which is in Ladakh, and one which is in Arunachal Pradesh. And the other one is on riparian rights, water rights. And, we've had 3 wars with Pakistan, but we've never fought about riparian rights. When we once increased the height of one of our dams, Pakistan protested, and we reduced the height immediately. Okay, so we have had no riparian right problems, but I'm deeply worried that the amount of water coming in, as it does from China into India, is going to be dramatically reduced because of the need from China to do irrigation throughout Western Tibet, Western and Central Tibet. And that will reduce the water coming into India. It has already happened with 2 major rivers, and I believe it will happen to the Brahmaputra, which is the Sangpo in Tibet, which will also happen. And that is, again, going to be a problem. So we are going to have some tense relationships with China going forward, the more so because of the territorial challenges that have recently occurred, first in Arunachal Pradesh and now in Ladakh. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Omkar. I got a couple of questions for you, if I may. First one is, I remember about 3, 4, 5 years ago, India was growing quite strongly. There was a period of time for 2, 3, 4 years when India was growing at 6, 7, 8, 9% per annum.
9 was about 9 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. So
when Chidambaram was the finance minister.
Okay. So what caused that? And then how can it be sustainable in order to consistently grow at a higher rate?
9% is not sustainable. It's a simple issue of compound interest. Okay, it is not sustainable. But Ronnie, if 6.5%, I'm not even saying 7. I'm not even saying 7.5. If 6.5% real can be sustained year on year, quarter on quarter, India will do fine. But 9 is not. 9 was there for 3 years. 9, 10, 11 was there for 3 years. and everyone thought that at least 9% was our birthright, but it's not sustainable. I mean, it's a simple matter of compound interest over a larger and larger base.
So can it sustain at, say, at 6.5 or whatever?
I do believe it can. I do believe it can. If we cannot sustain going forward at 6.5%, we will have no one else to blame but ourselves.
What needs to be done in order to achieve that? What are the changes in
allow reforms to take place? Don't interfere, and see, one good thing that is common between the Chinese and the Indians, and you've known enough Indians, is that both Chinese and Indians are very good business people. They're just large number of hustlers, right? I mean, so just let them hustle and create the infrastructure for them. So, I mean, if you have good highways, so for instance, one of the good things that's happening in India, it's a slow process, but it's actually happening, where the highways have become much better now. Okay, it'll take a long time to get to China's level, but you create the infrastructure for moving goods, you create the infrastructure for the ports to be better, you create the infrastructure for the airports to carry more cargo, we should be all right. I mean, 6.5 is a given. I mean, if we don't do it, it's entirely our fault.
How about the infrastructure? Can you say a word about that? I mean, the infrastructure in India is quite famous or infamous.
So highways have definitely improved. I've been a huge critique of infrastructure. Highways have definitely, no question about it, highways have improved.
I experienced that personally. You're right.
The power supply situation has improved quite a lot,
Correct.
Even though right now there is a problem globally about getting sufficient coal. But the power supply situation has improved. I suspect this summer will be a bit nasty for us, but generally it has improved. I think the airports have improved in terms of, I mean, I keep on asking myself a question that, people don't understand that Mumbai Airport, Bombay Airport actually has one runway, because it has two runways that cross each other, right? Which means in effect it has one runway, right? Now with one runway, how is it that they can manage to land so much cargo and so many passengers and take off so much cargo and so many passengers? Now compared to that, when you see Delhi Airport now has 4 runways, right? And so airports are doing well. And I think the other thing which I'm finding very, very happy, all of these will take time, is that the railway infrastructure is improving quite a lot. And they're dedicated lines. Now they're dedicated lines that are, so for instance, between Delhi and Bombay, there are 2 dedicated freight lines. Between Delhi and Calcutta, there is a dedicated freight line. Now, passenger trains are not going to go in that. So I'm seeing the improvement in, I mean, telecom anyway was a big improvement, but I'm seeing improvement. It'll take some time. But if the infrastructure continues to improve the way it does, we should, I mean, 6.5 is a given. It's almost like our birthright. We should have it.
And I may also add one thing, Omkar. I agree with you. I used to travel to India quite a bit, and the airport has improved tremendously. And the airlines, even, sorry, I'm not exactly a fan of Air India, but even they have improved a little bit. But the plethora of other airlines that have risen up, some of them didn't make it, like Kingfisher, but there are others that are really excellent. I love it. So I think that that goes to your point. But now let me turn to the structure of the economy. Does it need also some qualitative change in order to produce a quantitative growth? For example,
very good question.
Less reliance on the primary sector and so forth?
Very, very good question. Very good question. In terms of the share of primary sector, as in agriculture and forestry and fishing, to GDP, that percentage has gone down for China as well as India. So for both countries, we are sub 15%, the share of primary sector. So that has steadily come down for both countries. However, the real issue is the number of people who are dependent largely on primary sector income, right? So, and therein lies a big issue. So how do you ensure that people in villages and semi-urban towns, which are largely dependent on primary sector income, also depends on services sector, but largely on primary sector income, a huge population. How do you slowly get to a situation where this population is sufficiently confident enough to go into more and more urban areas to take urban sector jobs? Because the amount that is produced in the primary sector, while it has gone up and while it has created self-sufficiency in food in India for a long time, and it has increased the incomes of farmers, it is still not large enough to take care of this huge population that depends on the primary sector. So there is a structural issue there. And the real question there is this, that do you fix this structural issue by following China and Southeast Asian countries in their early period by focusing on manufacturing? Or do you fix this structural issue by focusing on services? So today, manufacturing accounts for about 26% of GDP, whereas services is close to 60% of GDP, right? So which one makes more sense? Does it make sense to recreate China and Southeast Asia of a certain time, or realize that that is not where in many areas we have a comparative advantage? We may have it in pharmaceuticals, but we don't necessarily have it in many areas. And how can we create world-class services?
But you're already at 60%, as you said. And for great job, that's good for the most part. But then why not also manufacturing? I mean, you are the world's biggest generic drug manufacturing.
So the real problem is
stuff.
The real problem is, you see, it is easy to set up something in the services sector. Okay, let me just give you an example. It's one thing to manufacture mobiles, right? Mobile phones. You need licenses, you need large areas, you need to purchase land, you have to hire a lot of people, etc. But it is much easier to have hundreds of shops that either sell mobile phones or repair mobile phones, right? It's as simple as that.
Right.
So if you go along a highway, Ronnie, now I keep on looking at what are people doing in the shops, yeah? And you can see it is bustling with services, whether it is repairing of mobile phones, whether it is, restaurants, whether it is serving snacks, it's just whether it's a petrol gas stations, it's bustling with services, and people tend to move into services immediately.
But what you're right. You go to any airport in India, and Oppo and Vivo, both are Chinese cell manufacturers, is everywhere.
Yeah.
And can the government give incentives to all these engineers? India turns out a lot of great engineers. Why not give them incentives?
So they're trying. They're trying. They are trying. Prime Minister Modi has come up with production-linked PMI, production manufacturing-linked incentives. People have applied for it. Some have got it. The jury is out. We don't know how much additional manufacturing capacity is being built because of this. In a few years' time, we will get the GDP data to see whether it is indeed the case. There is no question that manufacturing is growing, but there's no question that services is growing at a much faster rate.
What about education? You talk about physical infrastructure. How about human resource infrastructure? India has some of the brightest people, a lot of colleges.
Biggest problem. It's not about the guys who are in the Indian Institute of Technology or who are going to the good colleges, or like I went to the Delhi School of Economics. That's not about us, okay? It is about how do you educationally train people who are between the age of 10 and the age of 16. And I'm not talking of training in literature and stuff like that, but how do you train them to be able to do things that will help them get jobs when they're 18, 19, 20? And that is where we have not done well. Let's be very clear. We have done exceptionally well in higher education, exceptionally well. And therefore, all over the world, we have Indian technocrats who are CEOs, right? So,
Right.
but we have done exceptionally badly in primary, secondary, and tertiary school education. So if you are lucky to go to a good school, you'll do well, you'll go to a good college, you'll do well, and you'll go on, but a large number just don't get access to any good education. And that is a big problem. And that comes in the way of creating the human capital that we need for future growth. But even with this bad education, we can still do 6.5, Ronnie.
Well, Omkar, just to let you know, a friend of mine, Charles Chen, who is one of the founders of Tencent, started an educational prize that is global. And I think more Indians have won that prize than any other country. Yeah. And much of it is in the primary education and not tertiary, but primary and secondary education. So a lot of things are happening there, but somehow it is not filtering to or at least it's not populated everywhere with all the innovation they have.
No, not filtering sufficiently enough. Yeah, absolutely. If you got the, let me put it this way, if we could really fix the education system in the primary and secondary and in the final school leaving stage, if we could fix it in a 10-year period or even a 15-year period, I can bet you that 6.5% will go to 7.5. You'll get one percentage point increase in growth only on bettering education.
Back to your charts on the Indian population versus the Chinese population structure. It's obvious that there's a lot more young people in India, whereas there's a lot of older folks in China. So that represents a great opportunity, but also it's a challenge because you need to find enough jobs for these young 25, 30-year-old young male, right? Which without a job is dangerous to society often. So is there any way? Is India trying to slow down its population growth? You're going to overtake China in a few years.
It is, and it has slowed down. Actually, the latest National Health Survey has shown that the fertility rate has gone down, which is very good. The fertility rate. We have now got to a situation where our net reproduction rate will keep the population more or less the same. Okay, so it is slowing down. But we still have a lot of people, right? So.
Okay, there's a question from the floor. What are the vulnerabilities of the Indian economy from the Ukraine war, particularly if it is prolonged? Are there opportunities from the Ukraine war? How would it affect India?
Well, one vulnerability from the Ukraine war, if it is prolonged, is that there will be a rise, there will be a secular increase in the price of cereals, particularly wheat. And that, while India is self-sufficient in wheat, that would also, because of the secular increase in price of cereals, India will have to respond by increasing the minimum support price for wheat and rice, which will increase the amount that the government will have to buy in the minimum support program for the wheat. So that's definitely there. The other is, I do believe that if this continues for long, we are going to see many more ups and downs on crude oil prices. And in fact, it's a very simple point. We have reached a stage because of the Ukraine war where in any economic variable, international economic variable, the coefficient of variation has become much higher than before. And high coefficients of variation are not good for any kind of planning.
So the oil situation is going to affect everybody. It's not just you. It's going to affect China perhaps even worse because you're a lot closer to the Middle East. And so apart from the oil situation, what about mineral? Is that something that is of concern?
Not really. I'll tell you what is of concern is this, and it is to do with the Ukraine war, which is that it is going to affect shipping of goods which come from the Black Sea to the Sea of Marmara and gets out. And
Right.
when that gets dramatically affected, it is going to affect a whole lot of things. I mean, as it is, see, if they take, just to give you an example, Mariupol is no longer a port at all, okay? So if they take Odessa,
wow,
then you know, I mean, that's it. I mean, the whole western side of the Black Sea ports are completely out of, you know, just not going to be there. And that's a huge amount of stuff that used to move along those ports. I mean, all you needed to do was sit on the hill in Istanbul and see those ships come, right?
You know, now that you're onto that subject of the geopolitics of that whole area, I mean, that to me is so interesting and so worrisome, frankly, such as Turkey. Turkey is another big agricultural producer, right? And it controls the Sea of Marmara. You mentioned the Bosporus and the Dandanao and all that stuff. And so it seems, how will Turkey and Russia, because Russia, even if you control the Black Sea, if you cannot get out of it from the Sea of Marmara, what's the use? So what do you think will be the position of Turkey and its role?
I think Erdogan understands that. I'm guessing, okay, but I believe Erdogan possibly understands that the positions that he took before this conflict, both in terms of his, you know, strange notions that the only way of tackling inflation is to reduce interest rates, right? I mean, he's the one guy who consistently kept on saying that tackling inflation can be done by reducing interest rates. But I think Erdogan understands the difficulty of his position, and Erdogan understands that he has to renegotiate and recalibrate his relationships today. And you know, he felt he could be much closer to Russia as the seesaw against the United States. But I think he's going to need to renegotiate his position. So I will actually. I look forward to seeing a more sensible policy measure from Erdogan.
Let me ask you a question about inflation that you raised. Obviously, the whole world is today worried about it. It's not just India or China, but even America, right? So how bad do you think it's going to go? It will go?
It will continue for a while. It is going to be quite difficult. Two things will happen. For sure, the central banks will raise interest rates. So the Indian Reserve Bank raised it by 40 bips. The Fed raised it by 50 bips. You know, everyone is going to raise interest rates. The basic issue with interest rate rises is you never know how much is enough, right? And especially if inflation is commodity driven, right? If inflation is demand driven and not commodity driven, then interest rates work. But if it is commodity driven in a big way, then interest rates take a longer time to work. So I think we are going to be seeing a situation where all of us will find money dearer than before. There will be movement of money. There will be global movement, because, you know, when interest rates rise everywhere, there is a very rapid movement of money that goes into the US Fed. You know, I mean, people feel more comfortable with T-bills, right, than anything else. So I think we're going to see a situation of the inflation continuing for at least, I would say, 9 months to a year before it tapers off to reasonable levels. But we will also see a significant increase in interest rates and money getting dearer than before.
But then it seems to me that stagflation is going to be the name of the game.
I don't know whether it'll be stagflation or low growthflation. It may be low growthflation. But for instance, if the interest rates go up by, at the end of the day, by 250 basis points, right? Anybody who has made an investment in buying a house is going to be paying more. And therefore, the demand for housing is going to come down, relatively speaking. So there are different areas which is going to have a problem. So yeah, so I don't think we may have stagflation, but I certainly think that we will have low growth and fairly serious inflation, none of it growing over 10%, but the core inflation will be high.
What about the currency? Let's start with the rupees. You have been devaluating for the last 10 years, basically.
Yeah. And it's on the floor.
Forever, yeah. So what is the government's policy on that regard?
They occasionally come in, like they have last couple of days. They came in hard because people were taking punts on the rupee. So when you're taking a punt on the rupee at that time, when the government puts in, spends $2 or $3 billion to support the rupee, then those guys who are wanting to short it get burnt. So part of it was that. But the general thing in India is let it float. So I suspect that it's above 77. I expect it to float downwards.
What about the US dollar? Are you buying US dollars? Should any of my members here buy US dollars now that the world is in such a terrible shape? Or are you now losing some confidence in US dollar because of
what will you buy?
Huh?
What will you buy?
I don't know. I'm asking you. Euro, Japanese yen.
Renminbi is not international, however strong it is, right?
Yeah.
The euro, for all its years of being there, is still thought of as a poor second currency. The yen, which has been there even longer, is considered to be a sort of poor third currency, right? So what do you end up buying? You buy greenbacks.
How about gold? How about precious metal? It's limited.
A limited number of people could buy gold and precious metals, but a large number of people will buy greenback one way or the other by money going out into US stocks or money going out into US Treasury bills.
So you think it's still a good buy?
Yeah.
Are you afraid? How do you react to the following statement? When the United States at will freeze other people's assets, and everybody else is watching, including Germany, France, even Australia, Japan, all the French Quad countries, India for sure, and China with the hawk's eyes. So, what will happen when you see that America can freeze your asset at will? So does that call for people selling assets over the next 5, 10, 20 years that is US dollar denominator, or at least can be controlled by the US government?
You have to see a lot more of it before that happens. I think my own sense is that many other countries in the race of freezing assets, many other countries would be faster in the race to freeze assets than the US. And the other thing is, I feel that as and when the US federal government or a state government decides to freeze assets of a foreign entity, the recourse to court of law in the US is still very, very strong. So I would see more freezing of assets taking place in other countries and in much greater way than I would see in the US.
Following on the public questions just now on the Ukraine war, what do you see as the future of Russia? Isn't it worrying? If they win, you worry. If they lose, you worry, right? So what will be the next 5, 7, 10 years of Russia?
The wicked answer to that was made by Henry Kissinger in that wonderful, German Austrian way in which he used to speak, right? Where, if I remember the quote more or less right, he called it something like a third world country, but with many bombs. Okay, so I actually believe that Russia is in a very, very severely challenged situation. Very, very severely challenged. And I do believe that Xi Jinping, a clever man that he is, and he's so clever and he's so much more powerful, is going to be using the severely challenged position of Putin to his advantage. And Putin will more or less give it to him. So Russia is in a very, very serious position. It has some of the worst macroeconomic stuff there. Its dependency on a few things is so high that even without the Ukraine war, it was in a serious position. With the Ukraine war, it's become that much more serious. So it's I really worry about Russia. And I worry about it at two levels. One is the economics of it, okay? And the other is very difficult to explain this unless you've spent a lot of time in Russia. And I've been to Russia, a couple of times a year for 15 years, okay? That the feeling that the typical Russian has on the streets for Mother Russia, for Rodina, and the sense of nationalism that it has when push comes to shove is very, very high. So this kind of a thing can actually increase nationalism to the longer term detriment of the country.
Well, you mentioned Dr. Henry Kissinger. I don't think I'm betraying any confidentiality. About 5 years ago, twice, I believe it was, that at his office, Dr. Kissinger told me two things. Number one, Russia is no longer really a threat to the United States. However, he said also a second thing, and that is never underestimate the ability of the Russians to suffer pain.
That's right. Absolutely right.
And so that's in line with what you have said about the nationalism.
And when they suffer pain, and I have been in Russia when they've suffered pain, when the currency took a massive hit, okay? When they suffer pain, universally, starting with the lady who comes to do your hotel room, yeah, to clean your bed and clean your room, all the way down, okay? Every one of them believes that we must unite. Rodina is being threatened, and we must unite. And they have when they suffer pain, they have a very strong sense of nationalism. And one must never, never take that away.
My last question, Omkar, back to India. I'm sure that Prime Minister Modi consult with you periodically.
No.
Tell us what you told him. What is your advice to your own government in order for India to economically continue to improve and even its geopolitical positioning in the world? What would you tell Modi? What did you tell Modi?
I haven't consulted with him and he hasn't consulted with me. So, but if I were to, I would simply say that as far as the economic part is concerned, there are hundreds of things you can dismantle without any problem. Don't make, it's not the big dismantling that is an issue. It is, you can just keep on dismantling small things. I mean, like, for instance, who would have thought that a life insurance corporation could have a public issue, right? It's India's largest government-owned insurance company, and it's having a hugely successful public issue. So just, there are hundreds of things you can dismantle without newspaper headlines. And each of these help in getting things done better, okay? Just a small thing. I mean, one of the things he has done so successfully is he has actually, the amount of digitization that has occurred in India on day-to-day transactions, yeah, is unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I would never have believed it 3 years ago. So just just do the small things. And as far as foreign relations is concerned, he is very lucky. He has a top-class external affairs minister, Jaishankar, who has his brain everywhere, and who has, I have seen, not make a single false move, not only during this Ukraine situation, but from the time he's taken over. And we just have to flow with the kind of flows that are happening now, but also learn how to hold our positions. All of this is a knack of diplomacy. So, and someone like Jaishankar and his team actually understand it well, and Modi has given him a huge space to play.
Thank you, Omkar. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now past 8 p.m. here in Hong Kong. We have to call it quit. Thank you very much, Dr. Goswami, for addressing us. This is the inaugural program of the Chairman's Dialogue series. I'm delighted that it can be on India, a very important country in the world. And I'm very honored that Dr. Goswami should be our inaugural speaker. We hope to bring you many more interviews of global leaders, thought leaders such as Omkar. And hopefully we will also do a lot more programs on India. So Omkar, if you have other friends that you want to recommend, be it from the business community or from the academic community or from the government community, just let us know. We will be happy to bring it to our members in Asia Society. And the audience is not just in Hong Kong. Our audience is from everywhere. So we're delighted to have this program and the inaugural one with Dr. Omkar Goswami. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ronnie. Thank you very much. And hope sooner or later we're going to see each other in 3 dimensions.
Right. Let's do that. Let's hope that. And then next time when you're in Hong Kong, let me know. When I'm in New Delhi, I'll come visit.
I certainly will. Okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.